I'm Dr. Matthew Moore. I teach at Del Mar College. I'm pleased to be with you tonight, and I thank Coach Flanagan for inviting me here to share my thoughts with you. I'm going to talk about education from the perspective of reason and from the secular perspective. There will be some practical advice in there, and at a certain point, I'm going to aim towards you kids in particular. In its broadest and most basic meaning, education is the process of being led by a truth seeker to seek the truth for oneself. Because the truth sets us free, seeking the truth in education contributes to our freedom. Hence, the education's traditional purpose, to make people free by enabling them to think for themselves. This means that education ought to enable people not only to excel within their culture, but to transcend their culture, to critique it, and to judge it in light of its truth. True education is necessary for popular sovereignty. If people are to be citizen rulers, and if government is to be of the people, by the people, and for the people, then it's good for those people to set aside some place where they could take some time to seek the truth outside of the social, political, and economic forces of their time. The professor, who is meant to lead the educational process, must above all seek and profess the truth. He is given academic freedom precisely so that he can do so without being subject to the powers that be. This role was established by Plato 2,500 years ago when he formed his academy in the freedom found in a grove outside of the city where a man named Academos was buried. He founded it there because he had seen how his teacher Socrates had his search for truth, how it had led him to execution within the city. The tension between truth-seeking and social acceptability is a tension that we all have within ourselves, possessing as we do a nature that is both rational and social. Despite the tension between them, however, we need to integrate these two parts of ourselves, both individually in our personal lives and socially in the society around us. In fact, the two parts need each other. Political and economic forces operating out of self-interest, requiring conformity of mind and message, need the witness to truth in an uncompromising way offered by someone outside their realm to augment it within themselves. Such academic witness ought to help the politicians and businessmen to moderate their search for power and wealth and to maintain their human integrity, not compromising truth for the sake of business or social expediency. Just as those involved in the political and economic realms ought to help professors to learn to be more socially acceptable and to have a place in society. A couple of things needed to be added at this point. First, although these distinctions are crystal clear in the abstract, there is never any one single person who represents one or the other perfectly. It's always a matter of degrees. There's no professor who is entirely truth-seeking without any political or economic life, just like there's no businessman who entirely lacks a search for the truth. By exposure to the truth-seeking of a professor in higher education, education is not meant to convert students into pure truth seekers, but only to help them to be more rational than they would have been otherwise. Let me give you a practical example. I often tell my students in my ethics classes that they must have ethics from their families and churches before coming to me. I cannot teach them ethics in my class. I can only help them to become more rational in the ethics that they already know. And possibly I can deprogram them a little bit from the groupthink of pop culture. Ideally, for instance, a student would come to me having enough ethics from family and church to know already that abortion is wrong. And I could help them to discover and learn how to reason and demonstrate that wrongness using reason. Both St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas rightly taught that God reveals two kinds of truths, both of which ought to be accepted by faith. We accept on faith some truths that are just simply above reason, like the doctrine of the Trinity, like the doctrine of the Incarnation. These need to be accepted by faith, and we ought not even try to prove them by reason. But there's another kind of truth that's contained in the Bible. And this kind of truth is one that we could have known by reason. But for practical purpose, we're not going to figure it out because reason doesn't work that well outside of the Garden of Eden in the fallen state, where it's darkened, where our appetites are rebellious and our wills are weakened. This realm of truth, where there's an overlap between reason and revelation, is the area that I'm talking about tonight, focusing on tonight. The existence of God. Thou shalt not kill are two good examples. Those things are revealed to us by God, but we can also make rational arguments for them. We ought to learn to prove these and argue them by reason as well, if not only for the reason that it helps our neighbors in this society sometimes. Second, students ought to stick close to their parents and their pastors when they're in college. And this is where I'm focusing on you all, and I want to make sure that you hear this. You don't need to discuss typing with your pastor, but you should discuss every other class in the humanities or liberal arts with your pastor. I discussed every single humanities class that I took with my pastor when I went through 12 years of education in college. And I even wrote papers outside of class on topics that would be helpful that were given to me by my pastor. You're always welcome to talk to me as well. Right reason, in any event, knows that right reason knows that it needs God's revelation to come to the wisdom which it naturally seeks. So reason would tell you to lean on your pastor, rely on him. Like everything else, education is oftentimes corrupted. Let's look at how that happens, and this will bring us to see how social justice, in its current meaning, is not education. The best way to see how education is corrupted is to compare it to law. It's the definition of tyranny when law and government are warped to serve the private instead of the public and common interest. Good government does not serve private interest, but the common good. A good is common when it's good for all, regardless of race, class, party affiliation, or any other classification. Education is a common good because it does not only serve the interests of one group or another, but it contributes to human happiness, to the flourishing of human nature, to the good life for any and for all. Social justice in its older form, like for instance what we find in the civil rights movement, worked well by seeking equal access to common goods. As it's currently conceived, however, social justice is a repudiation of the older form. The current form of social justice is a branch of what's called postmodernism, rooted in the denial that there's any such thing as a common good. Current social justice is by definition the serving of the private good, the interest of the oppressed, conceived of in opposition to other groups, the oppressors. Who falls into each of these groups changes from year to year. In addition to denying the common good, postmodern social justice also denies common truth, so that there's your truth versus my truth, white truth versus black truth or brown truth, etc. I'm shocked at how many people in my field, how many professors have become purveyors of this postmodern social justice, when if its principles were consistently followed, they would have to declare universities, academic freedom, tenure, free speech, the search for truth, human happiness, the nuclear family, hard work, all are a part of the system that they claimed produced racial injustice. None of that's true, however, and people do not come to postmodern false social justice by way of truth-seeking, by way of education. They come to it because they think it's sophisticated, prestigious, a way to success and power. It's a bribe to abandon the fundamental human good of truth-seeking and to enter into the lust for power under its various masks. Power struggle is its lifeblood. Division is its lifeblood. Unlike truth-seeking education, this kind of false social justice schooling is poison in a democracy. It redefines the end goal of education, whereas truth-seeking education aims to teach one how to think by training the mind in a disciplined fashion, such that it's not easily hijacked by power movements. Social justice schooling teaches that there is nothing but power movements and private interest. It does not liberate the mind from the powers that be, but subjugates it to them in the deepest and worst of senses. It trains the student to excel within the movement, but not to transcend it and to judge its truth in terms of eternal principles. Just as social justice schooling warps the end of education, so also it warps the means. Traditionally, the means of training the mind would be the study of the reasoning of great thinkers from the past masters, as it were. For false social justice, the traditional canonical curriculum is a reprehensible instrument of oppression. Students of false social justice will need to get in league with the powers that be, to jump on a bandwagon of some sort, but they will not have been trained about how to judge the truth of it. This education does not contribute to freedom except in the mistaken sense of licentiousness, freedom from constraints of any sorts, freedom from truth, freedom from good and evil, from law, except insofar as compliance with them is part of success in some way. Social justice warriors cannot offer an explanation for themselves without contradicting themselves. Lacking the force of reason and truth, they turn to what we now call cancel culture, which we have seen is the modern form of mob rule. As with cancel culture, mob rule is distinguished not by moderation and reason, but by the domination of the passions and vice. Thank you very much.